Discuss the deepening implications of the new coalitions and municipalities. We are now joined in the studio by a political analyst and author of best-selling political analysis, The African National Congress and the Regeneration of Political Power, Professor Susan Booysen. Prof, thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening. Good to be here.
Now, the big news of the day, or one of the biggest stories of the day, is that the ANC Youth League has now called for the ANC to have an early national conference to elect new leadership. Is this even possible?
Well, we know it's hardly likely, and it is a bit of a late awakening for the Youth League as well. They have been so supportive and been defending the current leadership all the way. And now to call for it, and we know that ANC has just emerged from its NEC meeting where it took the collective responsibility for the dismal results in the election. And we also know that on previous occasions, President Zuma has even dared them early this year after the constitutional fiasco to replace him, but they're not ready. Their successors are not in place, and the front runners amongst the successors are not ideal candidates. So the ANC is really in a predicament, and so much of the problems in the branches has been caused by people already trying to strategize for a next round of internal elections, and that is not working.
Now, speaking of the branches, and something that I want us to touch on is the amount of power or lack thereof that the ANC Youth League even has at this point in time. You mentioned earlier on that they were very reactionary, that,
yes,
almost contradictory as well.
Yes.
Because at some point they are defending the leadership, and now it's a complete turnaround based on the outcomes and the results of the local government elections. Now, this announcement that they made today, will it affect the ANC in any way?
It is hard to imagine that it will, because this is such a pocket youth league. It's a little manufactured youth league. Since Julius Malema and his youth league went out, there's just not been a credible youth league. And it is hard to imagine what they can achieve with this call. It's mind-boggling. I don't think it will go anywhere.
Let's shift focus from the ANC Youth League and look at the coalitions. That's also something that's really on the minds of South Africa as a whole. All the new municipalities we saw today, the ANC taking the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, as well as Mogale City, which was an interesting one,
yes,
considering there was only one vote.
Exactly.
Take us through that one specifically.
Yes, it was with the recent alliances and with the DA forming alliance with the smaller parties and with the EFF coming in and supporting that alliance. And we could see on your own TV screens the jubilation in the chamber when that happened. We saw the same sentiment in Nelson Mandela Bay, in other places, selection of municipalities where unexpected new alliances now are taking over. And it is only at this moment that I think we're realizing the amount of bitterness and resentment that has been taking root against the ANC, and not just in the voters when the voters spoke about 2 weeks ago, but in the ranks of the opposition parties, that even a party like the EFF could come and say, we choose between two devils, we rather choose the DA here. If ever there was a serious, sad awakening, that must be it.
One that was almost expected, considering the relationship and the history that the EFF leaders have with the ANC. And that's something I want to touch on, what they said yesterday, saying that we're not going to go into any coalition, but we are going to vote for the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal and then vote for the DA in the rest of the Hang municipalities.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people are very confused about what that means. A lot of people are also calling it a secret coalition of some sort.
Yes.
What exactly does it mean when they say we are going to give them our vote, but we are not going into any coalition?
Well, I think it means very clever strategy from the EFF. They are getting that, they on two fronts. They are punishing the ANC, and they're getting opposition parties like the DA, who are now the governing parties with their help, but really to do their work in terms of accentuated pro-poor concerted service delivery. And the ANC completely is losing out completely in that front. The EFF watching the DA do much of the work, and yet the EFF would be able to step back when we come to the 2019 elections and say, look, it was under our pressure that we got, hopefully there will be improved delivery, and they would get much credit for that. But the interesting game is the DA is pushed further into better pro-poor service delivery. Come 2019 election, the DA and the EFF could be contesting for the same constituency, and who was really mostly responsible for that?
Now, let's look at some of the reasons why the EFF chose not to be in a coalition with the DA, for example.
Yes.
I would think that policy differences could be a major one, considering when you look at the manifesto of the DA versus the manifesto of the EFF. Is that an accurate...
Yes, manifestos are really entrance tickets into elections. When those get translated into service delivery, I think there's an amazing convergence between different political parties when it comes to services, like pit toilets, eradication of pit toilets, is socialist or is capitalist, whatever the case may be. I think the ideological differences evaporate at that point. There could be questions about municipal land. Do we sell it to a private school, or do we build a shopping centre, or do we build high-density housing? And those, but I think those are relatively small cases which could be negotiated.
Now, there are still some outstanding issues between the DA and the EFF. We understand in the city of Johannesburg specifically, reports coming out of there is that the EFF doesn't want Herman Mashaba to become mayor. They are saying that we will give you our vote only if Herman Mashaba is not mayor. Musi Maimane said yesterday they are sticking with their candidate. So in Tshwane they are sticking with Solim Simanga, and of course in the city of Johannesburg they are sticking with Herman Mashaba. Your take on that, and who the EFF perhaps does want, then who should be mayor if they don't want Herman Mashaba to be mayor?
I've been watching the utterances and statements and a range of media coverage quite closely today, and in several places Julius Malema is on record. They say they wouldn't like Herman Mashaba, they think he's whiter than white, or whatever the case may be. But several of those ones, they actually make clear, and Malema makes clear, that they will vote for the DA, for Mashaba, even if they know that
they don't particularly like him.
Yes, and the DA, of course, has said they have to stick with him because that's what the voters endorse. So it's only Herman Mashaba taking himself out that would solve that issue. But it seems that the EFF has chosen, yes, it's a principled thing, pro-DA, even if they go with this undesirable mayoral candidate.
Now I want us to look at the Ekurhuleni Metro, because it seems to be forgotten a little bit. We keep speaking about Tshwane and the city of Joburg. There the ANC seems to be forming a coalition with the AIC, but then the AIC has that condition of Matatiele being put back into KwaZulu-Natal. What's the latest there?
I've been watching all possible statements, and the latest that I could pick up is that alliance is on track with a but. And the but is that the AIC says they're waiting for the ANC to put this in writing, that Matatiele will go back into KZN. Apparently they're waiting and have not had the formal confirmation of that yet. And the ANC's 48.64 for Ekurhuleni is not going to turn into 50% unless they give that to the AIC.
Now let's look at this multi-party coalition, this multi-party government that we are seeing here. I saw a statement earlier from the ANC's Deputy Secretary General, Jesse Duarte, saying that, it could be a disaster if South Africans allow this to grow come 2019. What do you say to that?
A disaster for the ANC, yes. I think that we already see that they are taking power and is building up their majorities in some centres, and DA and the IFP are taking a few extra municipalities in northern KwaZulu-Natal. It has already enabled definitive majority in Nelson Mandela Bay. It assisted in Mogale City. In these cases, especially those top five there, IFP is a slightly different case. It's a very mutual, you help us, we help you arrangement. But the other four parties, small parties, are really very small parties. They're getting a new lease of life by going in with it.
Especially COPE, I'd say.
Oh, yes, but really all of them. The others are in that small, below 2% national support category where one cannot achieve much. And so this gives them a new lease of life. We've already seen a UDM deputy deputy mayor coming in Nelson Mandela Bay. And it's really new opportunities for those new parties, a further lease on life. Of course, it may happen that in due course they merge into the DA. That is not impossible.
Now, something that we discussed during the election week was the differences and maybe balances between national government as well as local government, because a lot of people were confused, thinking that we're going to wake up to a whole new cabinet, for example, if the ANC doesn't win majority, which is not the case.
For sure.
And I think that goes to voter education, etc. But something that UDM leader mentioned yesterday, Bantu Holomisa, he said that, you know, at local government level, the important thing, even with this multi-party coalition, is service delivery. At the core of it, that's what people want on the ground. And he mentioned something about depoliticizing local government, and that's the only way that service delivery will really happen efficiently and effectively. Is that an accurate statement?
I really do think so. And we're going to see that further accentuated now when it's going to be non-ANC councils that are going to have to control overwhelmingly pro-ANC and ANC appointed, sometimes good, sometimes useless, public servants in those local municipalities' bureaucracies. And that could be one step in that way towards depoliticized service delivery. Now, but the whole political climate is so polarized, and we see quite the ANC not quite being exemplary in ceding power in these August winds that are loosening the roots of those trees, the ANC tree that is so firmly rooted, and this is shaking up that tree. And we saw in a few of the councils now the ANC is not very gracious in handing over power, and we have also seen today there are threats against in the EFF provincial secretary. A DA councillor was assassinated in the Northern Cape in Gatlelopele municipality, and apparently had death threats before that, after they'd formed an alliance that would oust the ANC in a small council. And those are really symptoms of a very unfortunate form of transition that would have to be managed. We saw Julius Malema yesterday speaking out, reprimanding people in Mfuleni municipality that have been fighting over positions. We really need the ANC much more strongly than before, also speaking out against this ungracious forms of transition.
Now, Prof, you're a political analyst, and you've been looking at every single party and how, you know, they've come up and their strengths and their weaknesses, of course. Let's look at the ANC specifically, and not necessarily what went wrong. I think they've been speaking a lot about what went wrong in these polls. What do they need to do now to make sure that in 2019 they can see a better result, if possible?
Yes. You know, the first thing they have to do is restore the trust. The own esteem, and the trust part of the own esteem would be about going graciously into opposition benches and then really showing that they meant it very seriously when they said they go back to their roots. And there are so many municipalities where they are in power. It's not just these hung municipalities or the ceded municipalities. There are dozens of others, if not hundreds of others, where they can really show that they mean it when they say true service delivery, consultation with the people, not being arrogant in power, listening to communities, and not just their own communities, but communities in general, and showing continuous humility and service in that process.
Now, we're a relatively young democracy. I'm going to ask you like my last two questions now, because we're running out of time. Are we ready for a national government that is governed by coalition? That's the first one. And the second one goes back to what the ANC Youth League was saying earlier on, saying that they would stand with the Women's League on having a woman as the next president of South Africa. Your take on that, and are we ready for that as well?
Yes, okay, in the first place, are we ready for a coalition government at national level? The big question is that whether that is going to dawn on us in 2019, and whether the ANC can go back and in humility reinvent itself will determine whether they can have a reversal and turn their fates around. And so really, if we can be ready for that at local level. People getting ready in their minds that there maybe that point is inevitable. It will depend on the credibility that the opposition parties can create for themselves in this process. We are not there at this moment, but 5 years down the line, the mindsets might have changed altogether. And the readiness for a woman president, I think South Africa is always ready for a woman president, but it depends on the caliber of that candidate, whether that person is really a person in own right or somebody else's protege, whether that person is going to have credibility. The question is whether a woman candidate can resurrect the ANC.
Well, in reality, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is the one person that keeps popping up.
Yes.
A lot of talk around her. So let's look at her specifically. Do you see her as the next president?
I might as well have speaking about her in my generalizations now. We know that she has certain qualities. She is a strong person. She has not been in a position where she's had to give national leadership. And she's been at the AU and commission there. She has had a fair role there, not a brilliant run at all. If she can escape the image that she is the protege of President Jacob Zuma, that would help her candidacy. So far that has not happened. So far she has not put herself at a level beyond that. And so at this stage she will still bring in much of the baggage that people are associating with President Jacob Zuma, and which is responsible for much of the ANC's performance in this election. So far there is too close a bond between her and that baggage.
Now, just finally, Prof, when do you think the dust is going to settle? I mean, we thought at the end of the elections, once the results were out, the dust was going to settle and we were going to move on with our lives. But we had the coalition talks. After the coalition talks, we have now all the inaugurations of the mayors and the councils, etc. When do you think we're going to get to a point where South Africa gets used to this?
I think this election just doesn't want to be over. It is just continuing and continuing. Next phase will be a very close watch on how the new alliances are shaping up in government, how much the ANC is disrupting the new alliances, how much protest is being tolerated or instigated against new regimes. There is going to be a continuous challenge of the new alliances.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Very insightful discussion there.
Nice to be here.
That was political analyst Professor Susan Booysen joining us in the studio to make sense of political party coalitions and new municipalities. We'll have more news.